Hey everyone, welcome back to Wine and Rants. This is the first episode in a while. I recorded this a few times this week, but that means I ran out of wine. So tonight I made a martini, and it's just a basic martini. Nothing special. It's pink because I put some fruit punch in it. But tonight I want to talk about banana republics. And because this is the week I'm filming this is the week that the mess at the Capitol happened. So in the aftermath of that, banana republics have been brought up a few times, especially by George Bush, who we should know by now that I think of as the devil. So I just want to talk about what a banana republic is, why this comparison to what happened doesn't really make any sense. And if we want to put it in the context of making sense, we should put it in the context of if we consider this to be, a banana republic type ordeal or even a coup, like an actual attempted coup, why should we allow the United States itself, which, created these banana republics, to be free from the destruction of said banana republics? Why does the United States get to be an exception to the disaster it created? What if the United States is just starting to get, the blowback of what they've done as a foreign policy throughout the years, decades at this point, over a century at this point, honestly. So I wanted to get into that. So first of all, the Banana Republic is a politically unstable country that is fully reliant on one type of crop, one type of export, particularly bananas, but it can also be mining. And usually the export is monopolized, so it may be one or two companies, it may just be one, but it may also be like two. Usually those two companies also would combine into one. So you would have the United Fruit Company, you would have Cayume Bananas, you had, I'm going to mess up the name, Vaquero Bananas, but you would just have these companies who just control the entire economy of different countries. And these were multiple countries. It was throughout the Caribbean, throughout Central America. And today I'm just going to focus on three: Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala, just because I'm trying to keep these videos short and there's just so much that happened throughout the entirety of the Americas that this Banana Republic type event faced. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. As with every windy conversation that I start, I have to contextualize what I'm talking about. So how did these Banana Republics even come to be? Before I even get into the full context of what they are, how did they come to be? So the banana republics, especially the ones in the Latin American countries, are coming into power because the Spanish Empire has practically fallen. It has drawn back from the Americas. They've lost the Spanish-American War. They've had to give up land and colonies to America, to the United States. So these countries are newly independent, and with newfound independence comes instability because you have been colonized for so long. You may still have some colonizers in power who may not necessarily be directly from Spain, but they are Spanish. So you have these people who are still colonizers who are trying to re-envision what this colony should look like as a free state. So they're still trying to oppress the indigenous and black people in these countries. They're still trying to, create have their own self-interest. So there's just a lot of instability. Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica, and Guatemala, they are all going back at it with each other about who should control all the land. Like at one point there is a republic of all these countries, and then people break up. So there's a bunch of wars actually happening right after the Spanish leave, and in between, I think for I wasn't trying to talk about this, but I think for a good 30, 40 years, there's a lot of wars just in between Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala, and Costa Rica was in there in the beginning too. So there's just instability, and then with it comes instability, it comes disaster capitalism. So there are companies who are here to take advantage of that instability, and they take advantage of the corrupt leaders who are in charge. These corrupt leaders who are willing to give these companies whatever they want as long as the leaders get a kickback on the side. So, for example, in Guatemala, the United Fruit Company, which is now Chiquita Bananas, was given land for less than $1 per acre. They weren't paying any taxes. They were just chilling. And then the right-wing president of Guatemala at the time was just getting kickbacks from that. And so that was happening throughout throughout the entire Central America. In Honduras, the same thing. The president gave the banana company there, name is escaping me, but the president gave the banana company there a monopoly on the land, a monopoly on building trains. A lot of these monopolies built infrastructure, and that's what a lot of American economists want to give them credit for. But they don't include the part where the infrastructure was to be purely used for the transport of bananas, and then the banana companies could charge outside of use. So it wasn't just, it wasn't okay. These benevolent banana companies have created these railroads. It's basically the same thing as a public ran train. Like, everything is good. This is great. No, these were specifically owned by the banana companies, specifically to be used for banana transportation. In fact, if the land area that held bananas, if something went wrong, if this land area stopped producing bananas, they would actually, cut the crop and pick up the trains and move it to somewhere else. So the trains were not even allowed to just stay and benefit the community regardless of whether or not their bananas there. No, once the banana was gone, they physically took up the train tracks and moved them somewhere else, because the train tracks were there to help the bananas get to the port. The United States comes into play because these companies are owned by Americans. Oftentimes they were owned by Americans with very close political connections. Oftentimes a lot of the stability happening in these countries were led by American filibusters. And filibusters, as we know today, is like the Senate holding space on the floor. But filibusters back in the day were white Americans going throughout the colonies, and then after the empires fell back, going throughout these countries and trying to create states or just create independent capitalist freeholds throughout the Americas. One, I believe his name is William Walker, went to Mexico, tried to create a state in Mexico to bring slavery back, and Mexico was like, what the fuck are you doing here? So it was just a lot of stuff going on with these American business owners, and the American government itself just decided to interfere with everything. And that started mostly with the American government, started with the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine said that anything that happens in the Western Hemisphere is the United States business. It declared that, one, that imperial rule cannot come back from Europe. It declared that the United States had the right to protect U.S. interests throughout the entire Western Hemisphere. It basically declared the entire Western Hemisphere as a U.S. protectorate. And to me, I hear that and I conceptualize that as proto-Neo-colonialism. And Kwame Nkrumah, years later, decades later, he says what Neo-colonialism is, and he brings it up in the African context, but he also says, hey, this is a worldwide phenomenon, and we should talk about this. So actually, I have quotes for this. Let me pull up. And so he said, a state in the grip of neo-colonialism is not the master of its own destiny. Warnings about the dangers of communist subversion are likely to be two-edged, since they bring to the notice of those living under a neo-colonist system and the possibility of change in regime. And the essence of neo-colonialism, I'm just butchering words, is the state which it is subject to, in theory, independent and has its own trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, it is economic system and thus a political policy directed from inside. So the Monroe Doctrine itself, which comes way before Nkrumah conceptualizes neocolonialism, but it is here, and you see the way U.S. policy plays out. So President Monroe himself doesn't actually make it a foreign policy. He just says it in Theodore Roosevelt comes and he makes it into a foreign policy. He pulls out his big stick thing and just like, hey, so communists are scary. We have American interests in Central America. We have American interests in the Caribbean. We have American interests in South America. So we have to deal with this. We have to protect American interests, and we know that American interest itself is not just something that's freedom. We should know. We're adults. We should be adults. But we should know that American interests are not just freedoms, democracy. American interests are business interests. So these banana companies that are owned by American businessmen, and I keep using U.S. and American interchangeably. I prefer not to do that. But these are U.S. businessmen. They are connected deeply to these political offices, and they are being helped by the CIA to control these governments from the inside. And when the neo-colonialism part comes in, the idea that these countries don't have control of their own destiny is because when a president or just anyone who said, hey, these banana companies are not actually working in the best interest of our countries, what can we do about this? The U.S. government would step in because the banana companies asked them to, and they would say, hey, no, you don't get to have your own rights. You are now a socialist. We're declaring you're a socialist, and some of them were actually socialists, but that wasn't a bad thing. It's just a dirty word in America, in the United States. So we're going to declare you a socialist, and we're going to declare you bad for the U.S. interests, and we're going to declare you bad for democracy. So it was just like this idea that these people, even in democratically elected governments, like particularly in both Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala, every time they even Honduras itself tried to elect a liberal. I think Nicaragua also tried to just elect a easy level liberal president. And Nicaragua at the time was being occupied by the United States, by the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps was there to keep an eye on the elections of Nicaragua, to keep an eye on who was being allowed to come into power. And it was not, again, to protect these Nicaraguans. It was to protect the banana companies from being taxed, from having their land reappropriated, which means to have their land taken away and given to the people for better use. Because a lot of times, again, these banana companies aren't using their land for anything but bananas. And even when they own half the land in the country, the land was on 1/3 of that land was used. So they're just sitting on land. That land is not being, the money that is even coming from that land is not benefiting the country. The workers are being held on plantations. The plantations themselves do have housing, hospitals, schools, but those schools, again, are controlled by the banana company. It was basically almost like a slave plantation. Like they had no autonomous control of where their living quarters or anything. And again, this is something that the U.S. business economists bring up as a good thing. Well, they gave hospitals. That's because they had to give hospitals because of horrendous conditions on these plantations. They were constantly subject to disease, infections. They had no actual nutrition. So it wasn't to benefit the people. It was to keep their workforce alive because they kept them in crap conditions in the first place. So why are these American politicians today basically mocking the instability of these countries? What did the instability look like? And it looked like, my cat's here. Goodbye. Oh no. Listening, the American government flaming this right-wing hatred throughout these countries. So you would have, for example, in Guatemala, you will have a democratic socialist elected after a right-wing person was just like the people got fed up with him. They had a free election, never had a socialist is elected. You will have the American interest or American businessmen come in and say, hey, these socialists are trying to take your land. The socialists are bombing the bananas. They're mistreating the people. When it was, as we know, it was the right-wing people mistreating the people. So it's just really weird for them to bring this up today in the context of, again, the right-wing presidents flaming the hatred and pushing an insurrection for this, and then to say that it's not a banana republic. It's just a really weird thing to bring up because, I mean, clearly we are not a banana republic, but this is what you have done to other countries since the 1800s. But we can look at Honduras. Honduras had a president who was very pro-banana companies. He gave a monopoly for the train stations to the banana companies. And something went sour. He just wasn't getting enough kickbacks as he was getting before, and he basically took those benefits away. So the banana company, Cuyamel Bananas, which became the United Fruit Company, which became Chiquita Bananas, is like, no, you don't get to tell us what to do. You don't get to revoke our privileges. They called in the government. The banana company funded a complete overthrow of their government. Gave weapons, funded the coup. Instability caused hundreds of thousands of lives. In Honduras, there was an actual workers' strike. These people were asking for better conditions on the plantations because they were unhygienic. And they were unhygienic even though the overseers of the plantation would try to check these people's homes to make sure they were up to par for the plantation. Basically just trying to make sure they didn't have too many indigenous practices going on. But they would go and check these people's homes. But these people were protesting for the right to have cleaner homes, protesting for the right to health insurance, protesting for the right to have vacation days. Like, they're just having these basic protests, like basic union strike. And the United States government says, no, you do not get to ask anything of this company in your country that you technically have full control over yourself. You should be, you as a citizen of this country should have democratic control over anything that happens in your country. No, the United States paid the Colombian military, which we were doing stuff, other banana stuff down there with at the time too. They sent the Colombian military to Honduras and massacred 2,000 people. When the American public, mostly the American journalists, the U.S. journalists, started to catch up on what was going on in Honduras and just in Central America in general, that's when the term Banana Republic was coined, specifically dealing with Honduras. But when they tried to create stories about it, specifically in one instance with the New York Times, a writer tried to say, hey, this is what's going on down here. Our bananas are kind of like blood money. We probably should not be supporting this industry. The CIA actually stepped in and told the New York Times to not publish this. And this is something that has happened often. Usually our in the United States, media companies work hand in hand with the state. And this is something we should reckon with, something we should be talking about constantly. Stop! That is something we should be talking about all the time. Because we like to criticize other countries for having state media when we ourselves, our media that we have, that we claim is independent, that we claim is corporate, is usually influenced by the state, is usually not doing anything or posting anything without the state saying, okay, sure, yeah, let's go with this. And that could be different members of the state. So, you know, some newspapers, some media places are not as friendly to President Trump as they are to Democratic statespeople. So it's not to say that they don't criticize the government. It just says they also know who in the government they don't want to piss off. So we have these instances we start to see these instances of the Americans, of the United States, people in the United States, starting to try to figure out, hey, what is going on? This seems a little shady. How do we get to the bottom of this? And the government is just like, no, you don't get to the bottom of this. We've decided this is a U.S. interest matter. This is foreign policy. This is the Monroe Doctrine. Everything is fine. Thousands of people are dying at a time, but everything is completely fine. We can see the state kind of reckoning with how to control the media with Nicaragua. So Nicaragua, we started to occupy Nicaragua in 1909 to 1933. And in that period, there was lots of instability, as comes with occupations. And there was actually a liberal president who was an elected leader. And he's just a liberal. He's just trying to, give some taxes to folk, tax the people, tax the companies, just trying to create some kind of liberal, balance. And the opposition, which is funded by the United States, is just no. There's an attempt by the Marine Corps, who was occupying Nicaragua. Also, sometimes the National Guard would step in, but mostly the Marine Corps that was occupying Nicaragua would try to control the elections. They would try to control who was on the ballot. It was just it was intimidation. Basically, they're holding guns outside of state houses, saying, "I dare you to go against U.S. interests." In the 1920s, there's the Nicaraguan Civil War. And this civil war is between left-wing and right-wing forces. The American government steps in, tries to overthrow the Nicaraguan president, who I believe his name is Zelaya. And he abdicates, he leaves, but they haven't shut down the revolution. So they actually have to deal with more left-wing oriented people coming in. Because you've just interfered with these people's government, they're not going to take this sitting down. So it just leads into the Sandinistas. It leads into this ongoing, this escalates all the way up until Carter and Reagan. So you have the FLSN, who's created from this chaos, from this occupation, trying to save their country. At this point, 50% of American pesticides are being brought into Nicaragua to maintain the crops that are used for American businesses, and then those crops are sent to the United States. So there's just a lot of stuff going on that is physically harming the land of Nicaragua, harming the people of Nicaragua. There are 500,000 homeless people at one point in this country alone. And this is a dense country, this is still a forested country. At one point, the United States government was ensuring that the U.S. corporations had land, and they did this by making sure the Nicaraguan government kept land clear. So they wanted to make sure that the deforested areas that were probably cleared for some other type of crop. At this point, there's also cotton in Nicaragua. Is going past bananas, but it's still monopoly type industries. And the liberals have fallen. It's the actually I can look at this stuff. I don't have to do this. You don't tell me what to do. The samosas. So there's the samosas. They come into play. So they're in full control of the government. And so they're getting benefits from the U.S. to make sure the U.S. businesses are getting benefits. They're making sure that the land is deforested. They're making sure that the workers are desperate and just going to do whatever job that these American businesses will give them. So that brings in FSLN. And that brings in the Sandinistas. So, and then that brings in Carter, who's like, oh, we messed up. And then that brings in Reagan, who's just like, oh my God, communists, we got to destroy this. So it just creates this like Nicaragua is like a very long-winded issue with the United States, and it's just like today, like now, we're just like, I don't think anybody who could point to Nicaragua on a map. Americans are really bad at finding stuff on maps. But like we had this really just long, drawn-out history of creating destabilizing this country. And again, going back to the comments from this week, it's like, again, you're mocking what you did to these countries. These countries weren't banana republics on their own. They were banana republics because you ban right-wing extremism, and you need to reckon with that. You need to deal with what you have done to the world and how now that is reflecting back onto you. We have the same monopolized type infrastructure that we saw in Honduras, and it's also in Nicaragua. It's not the U.S. occupation, but there is U.S. interest in Guatemala. There's like the CIA is training the paramilitary right-wing troops, and they did send some soldiers to Guatemala to help with the Civil War. But Guatemala itself, again, is half of the land is owned by the UFC. The United Fruit Company, they barely paid for that land, less than $1 per acre. What happens in Guatemala is that President Arbenz, who is a democratic socialist, comes into play, democratically elected. He comes in, he becomes the president, and he says, so I am going to take your land, I am going to give you back what you paid for it, which was $1 per acre, and I'm going to repatriate that to the people. In Guatemala is mostly Mayan, so I'm going to repatriate this to the indigenous people of this land. She doesn't know what she wants in life. And yes, I'm going to repatriate this land to the people. And the United Fruit Company throws a fit. They start a full-out civil war, arming the right-wing militaries. That's the right-wing paramilitary. And the Guatemalan Civil War lasts from 1960 to 1996. In this war, there is something called the Silent Holocaust. The Silent Holocaust is the genocide of Mayan people. Over 200,000 people died during this civil war, and over a majority of them, almost over 90% of them, were Mayans. Because the paramilitaries were trained by the CIA to go in and just eradicate these people. They would go into villages. When I took my class studying human rights in the International Human Rights Court down in Costa Rica, we learned about this. Like we had to read these very traumatizing accounts of what these paramilitaries did to these Mayan people. They would go into villages, and you can skip through this part if you want, but they would go into villages, they would take children and bash the children's heads in. They would go in and they would rape and decimate all the women. You can, to this day in 2020, they are still finding abandoned graves in Guatemala because of this silent Holocaust, because of this civil war. And again, this lasted from 1960 to 1996. The Guatemalan people are still seeking reparations to this day for this military, not only from their own government, but from the U.S. government. That's how directly involved we were with this right-wing violence. And that is also why, look at my hair doing stuff. That is also why it is just so insulting for all of these politicians who, I just realized Biden also used the term banana republics to insinuate that the weird non-riot insurrection that happened this week is comparable to the violence that we've committed in these countries, to the hundreds of thousands of lives lost that we've committed in these countries. Not only are they saying it's comparable to that, and they making a jest of that, not acknowledging that they did that, but to say that it's not even in that same sentence to say that the way the right-wing violence is being flamed here is in that way incomparable. Why can't we conceptualize to say, hey, you know what? Actually, let's look at what we've done to these other countries. Let's see how we flame the right-wing violence. Let's see how we've just fanned it up and see, let's just look at that. No, we can't. They refuse to look at it. They refuse to even name this right-wing violence. They want to name it every possible thing. It's just Trumpism. It's just this. They can't name that because they are that. They have there is not a single administration that is not guilty of doing what happened in these banana republics. Even the Obama administration was responsible for violence in Honduras. And these violences are what created the migrant crisis we have today of people coming up from Central America into the United States. And so they can't just say that. They can't say, you know what, we have done this. We have done this right-wing violence as a country, not just Trump, as a country in these other countries. We have flamed up right-wing violence in our own country. Trump is not the first president to, or not even the first American politician to flame right-wing violence. I mean, we have had governors such as George Wallace flame up right-wing violence against Black Americans. We've had people flame up violence against Muslims. We had all of this happen, and we can't just say as a country, you know what, maybe we do have a problem with this. No, we can't do that. They just want to say, well, we are a banana republic, which is so insulting to these people who are even still seeking reparations to this day. So I just think that it's ridiculous. I hope these people receive their reparations, as every harmed person should, or harmed group of people should receive their reparations. As always, I'm going to put links to a more cohesive historical background in the little box underneath here. Subscribe. I don't care. Yeah, this is my rant.